Greetings, everyone, and welcome to East Meets West at the Vice. Today, the 10th of April, we have Jay Lee way in the east, actually east of Eric, Eric in the east, and Al in the west. And we'll be starting today with our good friend Jay Lee, who happens to be in the Netherlands. And you can tell us a little bit about yourself, Jay, if you wish, and the fly that you'll be tying.
Yes, sure. Hi, everyone. This is Jay from the Netherlands. Al and I go a long way, I think in the early 90s. And Eric, we go along a couple of years shorter, but we're getting along, becoming good friends, of course. I'll be tying a Coffin Fly, which is a spinner of a green drake, as you mostly know. I'll show you a picture of it. Oh, that's the wrong one, sorry. Let's see, where is it?
I've got you up on the side by side if that helps any. Oh, there you go.
Still the wrong one. Let's see, where is it? Here we go. So
you had it up for a second.
where is it? Can you see this?
There it is.
Yeah.
Yes.
There it is. This is the green drake done. And here in my vice, I got the green drake done. I just tied earlier this evening. But I'm going to show you the green drake spinner, also known as the Coffin Fly. I seem to have some trouble getting the right picture here. Let me see. How about this one? Can you guys see the Coffin Fly? The white...
I see a green drake.
It's still a green drake.
It's still a green drake, eh?
Every now and again, we get the Coffin Fly for a split second.
Oh,
there it is.
There it is.
There it is. As you can see, the spinner of the green drake, when it molts to a mature fly, the green body gets shed off and it turns into a creamish white body. You can also see the shiny wings and the dark thorax. And let's go back to the vice.
You want to go to the vice, is that right?
Yes, please. So here's the drake I tied. It has a done hen wings. I used green deer hair for the body. Pheasant tail fibers for the tail. But now I'll show you the Coffin Fly. The body is made of bleached elk or deer hair. The tails are still the pheasant tail fibers. I used yellowish dyed grizzly hackle as wingtips, and I use a badger hackle for the hackle. You can see the dark thorax here, and since it's a spinner, you should use your scissors and clip off the underside on the bottom, so it floats flush on the current. Well, you could leave the top hackle as it is, but you could also even indeed cut it off. This has been an experiment for me because I was looking for another way to make a thicker body without using too much dubbing, which is obviously the usual way to make a thick body, but really needs quite a lot of turns of dubbing. So a long dubbing noodle. So I was looking for an alternative, and I think I saw somewhere Kelly Gallup's tying a fly, and he used a similar technique to make a body out of deer hair. So I replaced the dubbing body with bleach elk hair, and well, it sure makes a very easy and thick body without the bulk, and it's also because of using deer or elk hair, it should be much more buoyant than dubbing. So let's tie one. Here is a size 10, slightly longer shank than usual. Since coffin flies are quite large, let's say size 10, maybe even up to size 8, rather than using a long shank hook, I am using the pheasant tail fiber with a long tail to get the illusion, the profile of a much bigger buck than the hook size shows. So I'll be using a bleached elk hair for the body, a badger hackle for the hackle, and I got here 2 grizzly hackle tips for the wings, and obviously a pheasant tail for the fibers. And I selected a badger hackle to tie in the hackle. Okay, let's start. I'll start it around 1/3 behind the hook eye. So this will prominently give me directions about the proportions. I'm going to tie the wings first. I got a left and right side hackle from the side of a cape, and I'll measure it, let's say slightly longer than the hook. I think it's just basically for a profile rather than anything else. So if you have let's say wings from poly yarn, that should be okay too. Okay, so I use a pinch wrap to secure the wings. Let's get rid of this part we don't need anymore. Okay, a couple of wraps to secure it. I'll stand it up a bit using a couple of threads just in front of the wings to stand it up. I'll leave it this way because we don't need it at the moment. I'll select 3 fibers from a nice long straight pheasant tail. And again, we want a big profile, so we'll measure it slightly longer than the hook. So let's move backwards. Let's check where the shank ends. Basically, if you just hang your bobbin let it hang, then it should be around where the barb is. So maybe 2 wraps further. There we go. Okay. Using a pinch wrap again to make it sit on top of the hook shank. And what you could do is maybe wrap one wrap under the wing, under the tails to get it a bit stand up a bit. And let's wrap it forward and secure it. I'll end it here, just behind where I clipped off the wings. Well, I'm trying to get the tails nicely split, but well, this should work. Okay, let's select some elk hair. Obviously, you want a rather slim-bodied profile, so you don't need a whole lot of hair, but let's say somewhere around 20 to 25 to 30 fibers of elk hair should be enough. So I'll just cut it off. Okay, let's remove all the junk. I'm using the tips of my scissors to move them away. Okay, and let's stack them. I still need one of those secret stacking devices I'll always use, but until I get one, I'll just use my old stacker. Let's see. Oh, we've got a nicely aligned tips here. Well, we want the tips of the hair just past the shank. We don't want a big skirt. We just want a short, let's say, flaring just in front of where the tail starts, and we don't want too much bulk behind the wing, so we should measure it, let's say, and I'll just clip it off so the end of the butt section will be rubbing against the wings ever so slightly. So here we go. What you want to do is make 2 loose wraps and wiggle with your fingers so the deer hair is spread around the hook shank. Let's see what happens. And as you wiggle, it should spread the fibers around the hook shank. And what we're now going to do is make rather deliberate but still fairly loose wraps to make sure that the hair is spread evenly around the hook shank. Okay, we're now at the end of the hook shank. We'll give one ever so slightly snugger pull to make sure that the hair doesn't go anywhere, and we'll go diagonally back, forward, and we'll increase tension a bit. And this way we'll make sure that the elk hair will stay where we want them to stay. Okay, we're just behind the wings now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap all the loose deer hair fibers so they don't get in the way when I want to hackle them. Okay. One secure wrap, a couple of secure wraps before, in front of the wings. Let's have a look at the body. As you can see, it's nicely spread it around the hook shank, and the larger wraps moving forward also makes the segmentation come out, so which is rather nice. Now we're going to make some preparation to tie in the hackle. What we don't want is too much of a difference from, let's say, the thicker part just behind the wing and the front part. So we're going to wrap a couple of thread wraps to make sure that the difference in thickness isn't too big. You don't have to even it up, but just a couple of wraps to make sure that there's no too big jump. Okay, I'll leave this wing as it is. When you finish hackling, what I'll do is I'll spread them out to make them look more in a span style. So here's a badger hackle with a nice dark center, which will also accentuate the dark thorax of the spinner. This is a size 10 hook, so you should look for a feather which is accordingly to the size. I'd rather say look for a hackle which is maybe even bigger, because the hackle should be cut and clipped later. So basically the hackle fibers will also look like the shiny transparent wings. Okay, let's move backwards and make sure that our hackle is tied in nice and snugly. I want the shiny side facing forward. Okay, make sure that there is a piece of stem without the hackle here. So when I wrap the first wrap, we don't get fibers sticking out all the direction. We don't want them. Okay, the first half turn using the fingers, and I'll use my hackle plier. Okay, I think I'll use 2 or 3 wraps behind the wings. Okay, need the third wrap. Reach out with your fingers and make sure that the wings don't get trapped. And let's make 3 wraps here. Okay, as you can see, there's a bare stem just behind the hook eye. You don't need to tie this catskill style, but maybe I just got stuck back in the early 1900s, so I'll just use the catskill style to keep the bare stem, oh, sorry, the clean neck just behind the eyes. Okay, let's finish it up with a whip finish. Hopefully I don't knock my camera while doing it. Okay, that should do it. I'll just push it back with my fingernails to make it sure that the clean neck is clearly visible. Okay, here we go. And now I'll spread the wings downwards to get the bent wing profile. And what now you could do is use your largest scissors and clip off the bottom of the hackle so the fly will Sit flush on the water. So make sure that the tails are nicely spread out to give a good, nice profile of a spinner.
That's gorgeous.
There you go.
That is gorgeous.
It's in my opinion a lot easier to tie rather than using dubbing, which is quite a cumbersome way because you need quite a long dubbing noodle. And using deer or elk, you can make a buoyant body
your flotation might be a little bit
fast.
better too.
Pardon?
Your flotation might be a bit better too.
Absolutely. This will get, I bet, quite a better flotation than dubbing, which will eventually get waterlogged. And yeah, so I haven't tried this yet because, as I told you, it's just an experiment. But I think it's a rather nice way to tie a spinner using natural materials, obviously, but also it's in my opinion it's easier and faster to tie than using a dubbing noodle for the body. So here you go. Here's
Jay, I
Coffin
just
Fly.
love your impeccable tying. I love watching you tie, and I would really want to have you on here for that reason. It's always exquisite, my friend.
Thank you.
And we got
Are
the
there
two
any
of
questions?
side by side there.
Any
And
particular
assume
reason? Any reason you use 3 tails versus 2?
Well, nothing specifically scientifically, let's say, but I think it looks nice, and if you lose one tail, you still got another tail for the profile.
Very good. Thank
But
you.
I think someone told me that the green drakes have done as well as spinners. They have 3 tails, so I just picked the 3 tails also for this
Okay,
one.
that's the technical difference because all the Calamatas out here only have 2 tails out west.
Mm-hmm.
That's why. Okay.
I actually like your excuse there. The best I've ever heard is in case one gets broke off, they still have 2. I like that a lot. I'm going to remember that one and use Jay Lee as my source of information.
Yeah, and you never know when the fish is going to miss a tail. You know, you just can't see it. So but it still sees 2.
Yeah, yeah, for
Well,
sure.
I think also 3 tails adds to the vision of size. You know, a larger size than it actually is. Because if you want to really make a large fly using a long shank, it's quite a cumbersome fly to cast and fish. And using a long tail, I think you could get away with a smaller fly and still get the impression of a large fly in profile. So that's my theory. Whether the trout agrees, I should have to ask them.
Jay, we thank you so much for staying up late tonight to show us some impeccable fly tying and something that we could all aspire to be as good as. And I did want to take a moment here too to comment on how interesting the fly tying world is, that people from different parts of the world become dear friends all because they wrap thread on a hook. Yes, it's pretty wonderful. Anything else for us, Jay, before we move on to Eric?
Well, it's just around midnight here, I think, but I'll just hang around for maybe half an hour and I'll leave quietly if you don't mind.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Sure, we're welcome.
Okay, Eric. Well, now we get to watch you work your magic.
All right. Well, I'm going to do the I'm going to call this tire that I'm going to do a flyby. He's in a sense he's the anti-Catskill tire in a lot of ways. I'll show you this book here. This is Fran Betters and I'm from his neck of the woods, up in the North Country in the Adirondacks. And Fran tied, I don't know, 150 flies a day for years and years and years. And I first got exposed to his flies when I was very young, just starting out. I mean, probably 12 or 13. And I was tying flies of my own that were just miserable. And I went into Larkin's Sporting Goods in downtown Plattsburgh, and there was a whole box of Fran Betters flies in there. And they were mostly Catskill style ties, but there were also some Wulffs. Now, I don't think at that point he had even invented his own Ausable Wulff. He was probably in high school when he tied this particular box of flies, and I bought some over time. And I mean, it was Quill Gordons and Light Cahills and Dark Hendricksons and so forth. And they were just fantastic. And I couldn't come close to them because I didn't have the hackle he had. Well, I'm reading in this book the other day, and at one point here, he says, 2 long saddle hackles supply as much buoyancy as 4 good neck hackles. Note silhouette of hackle on finished fly. And this is the Ausable Wulff. This is as it should be, as this fly was designed to float well in ripples and turbulent water. And that is the point of this fly and Wulffs generally. He tailored the coloration to the waters of the West Branch of the Ausable. He had a fly shop on the West Branch for years later. This is after this box I'm talking about. But I always knew there was something about his hackle that was different than a lot of the quote unquote, they weren't really flies tied in the Catskills, but they were Catskill style flies. They had longer hackle, but it was kind of wimpy. It wasn't like real Catskill, the good Catskill hackle. And there was so much junk in the stores. And we didn't have fly shops then. And Fran's flies were just the opposite. They floated like crazy, and they lasted forever. They were just great. Now, later on in his career, he started tying simpler things. I think things that were easier for him to crank out a number of flies. He tied 8 hours a day, every day for years and years and years, and had a line of his own flies like the Haystack series and the Usual. I am going to do the Ausable Wulff, and I'm going to do it on a slightly longer shank hook, because Fran tied most of his Wulffs on a 9671 streamer hook, which has pretty long shank. And the tail is the guard hair from woodchuck, and he loved the woodchuck. He wrote poems about the woodchuck, as a matter of fact. That's how much he loved using these guard hairs from the woodchuck for tails. Wings, white calf tail, which is standard Wulff. Body, Australian possum, dyed rusty orange. Hackle, grizzly and brown. And the head is hot orange, and the thread used is throughout the fly is hot orange as well. And some of his dubbing on a lot of I've had a number of his Ausable Wulffs over the years, and a lot of times you can literally see the orange thread through the dubbing on his stuff. But there's a lot of orange going on, and that has to do with the water and the tannin, and I guess it's tannic water, tea colored water, the Saranac and the Ausable both in spots. So let me get going here. It's going to leave enough room for the head on this. Take it back here to all the way back to the bend. Tail goes on first on this, which is not exactly in the Catskill tradition. And this is not meant to be a Catskill style fly, really. Although there are aspects of it that are Catskill-like. He liked a long tail and he liked tall wings for this fly. This is woodchuck. And it's got a ton of fur down here that we need to get rid of. Fran never stacked anything. We want this to be about hook length starting from behind the eye. We'll cut this somewhere past halfway. Hold his tail in place. This has a big bulky body. Probably going to tie the wings in right about here, about a third of the way back. He wanted a lot of tail. He wanted a lot of dubbing. He wanted a lot of calf tail wing material on this fly, because floating anything on the Ausable on lots of parts of it is tough. In fact, standing up in the Ausable is tough in a lot of it. And I'm going to get rid, I've got a lot of bulk here. I'm going to get rid of a whole bunch of it over my wastebasket. Flicking it up and down and like so, and just getting rid of short fibers. And again, tall wing on this. And I'm going to cut this in a very short taper. Bind it down. I think at this point, Fran made his wings upright and divided. If I recall his step-by-steps in the book, so I'll do the same thing. And he very much bundled these wings, which I'll do, and I'll try to keep the bundle low to keep the, I know Al doesn't want to see any orange thread, or a fly shop owner that he tied for at one point. But on Fran's flies, you could see it. You could see the orange thread. I'm sorry to report. But tying all those flies every day Well, they were, I mean, he tied them very well, impeccably, but honestly, his style was a messy one. And in many ways, I think that, especially flies like the usual, I think that helped the fish catching ability of a lot of his stuff. It was very rough. And that's all he cared about was the fish catching and the flies lasting. His flies did hold up. All right. I should have stopped that little short of the tail. Got some of Al's dubbing wax here. And this is some Australian possum that's been dyed rusty orange. It's very rough dubbing, and it traps a lot of air, and it's good stuff, and it floats a fly very, very well. And let me see, I don't want to dub this left-handed. I have to be cognizant now of going clockwise with my dubbing. And this whole series is going to make me a better tire. And that's the point always. Everything I've ever done. The commercial tying I've done in the past was just to get better. It was the only thing I've ever cared about is getting better. Not making money, certainly, getting better. And I'm going to let this thread show through just like Fran did. I'm going to back off a little bit because it needs to be a little bulkier than this. This fly had a lot of bulk the way Fran did it. I don't want the dubbing to be that bulky. I just want the end result to have bulk. Let's see. It'll work. This fly gets 2 hackles. It was meant to be hackle-wise. It was meant to be like an Adams. He thought the Adams was a very effective fly, and he liked the hackle on the Adams. I tie these back to back. Like Jay, leaving a little bit of stem to get them started well. Try to even this head up a little bit. All right. And the first one I'm going to wrap will be the brown hackle. And I want this to angle forward, these flues, and of course, it's not going to cooperate. Not going to belabor it. About 3 turns behind. Not going to go right in front with this. Right in front of the wing. Go right in front of the wing with that one. All the way up to the eye. That's what he wanted. And that's the Ausable Wulff. Fran Betters Fly. Let's see if I can.
Excellent job. I really like the way you did that hackle. That came out looking really good.
Well, I want to take just a minute and read a short passage on Fran's ideas on proportions. And it's in fine print at the end of his chapter on the Ausable Wulff. He goes, the tail and wings of Ausable Wulff should be about the length of the hook from bend to eye. Hackle should be just a little shorter than the wings. Well, I'm here to tell you he didn't do that. He didn't tie his flies that way. I mean, the fly on the cover here is let's see if I can figure out how to hold it up so you can see it. But on this fly, which I can't seem to figure out how to get held up.
There it is, Eric, right there, right there.
Notice how short the hackle is. It's about 1.5 times the gap of the hook, and the wings twice the length of the hackle. And that may be what he thought he was doing, but I've seen tons of his flies over the years, and they had very compact hackle, always very compact. They did in the early days have some taller wings, as I recall. You know, my memory's not perfect on the Catskill stuff he did in the early days, but even those were very compact hackle. close to what you read about in books now. You know, you read that the hackle is supposed to be 1.5 times the gap, and the tail is supposed to be shank length, etc. So he didn't tie, especially with his own stuff, in the true Catskill style at all. Let me go on and read a little bit. Hackle should be just a little shorter than the wings. He didn't do that. I prefer to use the longer shank 9671 hook since it gives a better balance to the fly. And he went away from that ultimately, and started tying on just regular size hooks. The fly should be tied with heavy wings and lots of hackle, which he definitely did. So the longer shank hooks allow more space for an appropriate size body, making a much better balanced floating fly. This is why the long, stiff saddle hackle instead of a couple of neck hackles. And then he goes on to talk about saddle hackle versus neck hackles. And of course, saddle hackle for Catskill tires was not used. They always used neck hackle. So in that way, again, he differed from the true Catskill style. Whether he tied in that style or not, I'm here to tell you he tied great flies and was a great influence on me. And that's it for the Ausable Wulff.
Okay, well, I'm going to put Jay Lee back into the picture on the side-by-side for just a moment, because I want to read something from the comment section. There were several comments to Jay about the Catskill style of tying, and Jay commented, the Catskill style dry fly has this profile that is very typical for the style. Sparsely dressed, sparsely hackled, and probably the most recognizable is the clean neck. This is a tiny part of the hook shank right behind the eye that is visible. And then he says, please check some of the traditional Catskill style dry flies on my blog. And he listed the blog in the chat, so you can go there and copy it, do a Control-C, Control-V, and put it somewhere where it'll be handy for you to get to it. But anyway, it's bassbug.blogspot.com, but it's in the chat waiting for you. Anything else that you want to comment on, Jay, before we move on?
No, it's a little blog I started in 2005, I think, and it was a replacement of sending pictures to my friends in the States. You know, some of my friends were way too old to understand the whole. I sent pictures, you know, printed out at the picture at the camera store, and you know it became really cumbersome. So I said I'll start a blog and I'll post my pictures of my fishing adventures, and you can look it up yourself.
Sounds like a good plan, using technology to communicate.
Right.
Anything more from you before we move on, Eric?
Nope, I'm good. Is there any questions?
Okay, well then I guess it's time for me to take off and go in a totally different direction. And let's start by taking a look at the roadmap fly. This is the 141, and I got to tell you that it showed on the title page. It's the 141 Wulff. In fact, let's just take a quick look at the recipe here. The first time this had the name Wulff even associated with it was about 5 minutes before I put this project together here day before yesterday. Up until then, this fly was the 141. It wasn't a Wulff, it wasn't anything, it was just a fly. And Gretchen and I almost never name our flies until we go to publish them. And when you publish them, you can't publish a question mark beside the chapter name. It just doesn't work. So anyhow, I stuck Wulff style in the title, but the name of the fly is the 141. You'll find out why here in just a minute. I'm using a dry fly hook, a size 8 to 22, and today I'll be using 12. The thread is black, red, white, or whatever you want. I'll be using 2 colors, white and black. The tail is moose, but it can be deer or elk. The rib is optional. I will not be putting a rib on it. The body is embroidery yarn, and the particular color code for this one is 141, so you can figure out where the name came from. It was really a real bit of inspiration to come up with that name. The wing is calf, and it can be body or tail hair. I'll be using tail. The hackle will be brown, but we've used everything under the sun, whatever happened to be laying on the fly bench. And the head is thread. So let's take a quick look at the materials. I'll just kind of point a few things out to you in their regard. We're starting out, of course, I sprayed everything down with that. We always talk about that. Brown hackle, I've already got it sized for a size 12 hook. Calf tail, black, white thread, and this is 141 color Coates and Clark, I think it is. Anyway, it's one of the brands of embroidery yarn. That's what it's called. Here's some other brands and colors. And what's interesting is all the years that we've tied this fly with different colors, she'd say, "What did you catch it on?" "I caught it on a brown 141. Well, you figure out everything. A 141 covered just about anything and everything that had a white wing on it and some kind of hackle. Anyway, tail material, number 12 hooks. And let's get back to the vise. I'll take the fly out and take a very short break as I switch glasses to my real close-up glasses. And I'll take this guy out and set that aside and put a size 12 hook in the jaws of the vise. And I'm just going to really quick now move over to the materials area and grab a few things. So I'll start off by grabbing the hackle. I'll just set that over at my tying area so it'll be close and handy to get to. I'll leave the black thread here for now and place the white thread over there. And let's see, we'll pull this around. And but I've already got a piece of the embroidery yarn selected, but I wanted to share with you all that I think you can see that says 141. And the manufacturer is JP & Coates. Now, these others are manufactured by a company called DMC. So their numbers are different, 740. Anyway, we called everything that had this kind of a body on it a 141. Anyway, back over to the vise. I'll just take my white thread, and I'm going to start about 1/3 back from the hook eye on the shank. And I'll just wrap pretty close to the end of the shank. Whoops. And I'll get there so that my thread's hanging right about the barb, and I'll come forward halfway. And that will be the place where I put my moose tail. Now, I'm having a little trouble with my thread right now. It's wanting to slip. And so I took a little half hitch around the arm of the bobbin holder. Anyway, back over here, let's get into some moose. And I'll just leave it lay there and take a scissors and lift a piece up that I feel is about right. Clip it off. And I will slip out over the waste bin on the way to the vise and clean my waste out of the hair. And then back over here, I've got all the waste out of here, all the fuzzy stuff and the short fibers and everything. And we will put it in the hair stacker, which is a homemade hair stacker that Jay Lee keeps trying to buy, and I won't sell to him. And we will measure our tail for length. Now, I've got a few shorter fibers in here that I'm going to get rid of first. Besides, my tail is going to be just a little bit too robust with the number of fibers that I had in it. How many fibers do I like to have in a tail? Well, if you take those fibers and give them a twist and compare it to the outside diameter of the hook eye, when they equal each other, you're just about right. I'm going to measure it for length, which is the length of the shank. Set it in there, and if you're going to make a mistake on it, make it a little bit long rather than a little bit short. I want you to notice that I use some pretty tight wraps, and that moose, even though it doesn't flare much, it flared pretty good. And that's because I put some really tight anchor wraps in the really tight anchor wraps on this, and it's started to flare on me. And that's what I want, because I want it really tight there. And then as I wrap towards the back, I want to control the flare. And I'm loosening up just a little bit. So the tightest wraps are in the center, and the not so tight wraps are towards the back. That way I get a nice profile on my body. Now we'll just trim off the waist here. Trim that right up. Okay. And now I'm going to advance forward to that 1/3 point. Don't go too much in front of that. And I'll slip over here and get a little bit of calf tail hair. And all right, I'm going to go back to the waste bin on my way back to the vise and clean out the waste. Let's talk about the hair that I cleaned out and the hair that I didn't. Too often people use too much of the stuff they ought to be throwing away. Now I've got the really long stuff here. I will call that layer 1, and right under it is layer 2, and everything beyond that, short stuff and fuzz and everything, that got thrown away. So we just want to use those longest 2 layers of hair. And I had a little bit there more that I needed to get rid of, so I got rid of it. That'll get me down to a nice bunch of hair. And the reason that we get rid of layers 3 and 4 is because I think it's because of the difference in the maturity of the animal, that the shorter fibers are slightly different. I don't know, or I could be very wrong in that. Calf doesn't have a lot of maturity on it. I don't know whether that has any credibility or not, but anyway, for some reason, they have a different property. Even though they look the same, they have a very different property. Now, I'm going to tie the wing on right there, and I'm going to tie it down on my side of the hook with snug but not real tight wraps. And that's because I cannot put a wing on and make it the right length to save my, you know what. So I want it to be equal to the length of the hook shank. So I'll take another hook, and then I'll pull that wing until it's the correct length. If I don't do that, it ends up wrong every single time. And you would think after 60 years at the vise that I would have been able to develop a feel for that. Well, it hasn't happened. Anyway, now I'm going to trim off the waist, and I want you to notice that I'm laying the scissors flat along the hook shank. You can do it from the near side or the far side. I'm doing it from the far side, pulling that hair back at about a 45-degree angle so that when I cut it, it will blend into the waist from the tail, and the two will kind of blend together and make a nice smooth transition from the tail material to the wing. Now let's pull those wings up. And I'll wrap a thread down in front to force those wings up. And pull them apart. And why am I using white? Well, Eric kind of talked about that. One of the things that Gretchen and I made a point of all the time that we tied commercially together was to be certain that Any of our white winged flies didn't look like they had any thread around them at all, that they just magically appeared out of, I got to go back and redo that. I missed a fiber. There we go. That they just magically appeared out of the body. And that's what we've always done with our commercial orders. And it just continues to today. Is that the right way to do it or the wrong? There is no such thing as right and wrong. It's just having the materials do what you want them to do. Now I'm going to switch to the black thread. Let me reach over here and grab that. And we'll just pull this black out. And we'll trim that. Let me make an adjustment in my bob here. Okay. Now, I want you to notice that I stopped my thread right at that transition point between the tail and the wing material. You'll see why here in just a minute. I've already kind of split this up, but this embroidery yarn comes in six, the whole bundle is 6 strands. Well, I've broken this up so that I can easily pull out 2 strands. And what I'm going to do now is leave a fairly long tag and tie it in right there at that transition between the wing and the tail, leaving it right on top of the hook shank as I wrap towards the back of the hook. Now remember, I have fairly soft wraps keeping this tail from flaring. So what I don't want to do is come in here and pull real hard and have it all flare out of me. So I'm going to have to back up now and try to undo what I just showed you here. And I'll just go back. All right, there we are. That looks pretty good. Now I'm going to leave it hanging right there for the moment. You'll see why here in a minute. And let me just trim that out. Now what that does is it finishes cleaning up that transition between the wing and the tail so that I have a nice smooth underbody, because my underbody is going to show through, because all it has is a couple of these strands of embroidery yarn, and you won't be able to cover up a poorly tied body with some clumps of dubbing. It'll have to be on the floss or the yarn, whatever. Now I want you to notice that I'm leaving the thread hang there at the back, using a Dutch Bachman trick of allowing the weight of the bobbin, the thread and the bobbin holder to force that floss back against the previous turn. I got a strand, or not a strand, but a fiber of hair here. It's giving me fit, so I just cut it off. See how that just pulls that in and keeps those fibers right close to each other, and it also keeps them from separating. So if you have your floss is tending to separate on you, well, you just found a way to stop that. And I'll just trim this off. Set that aside. And I can see I got one bad here sticking right up there. Ha, he's gone. I couldn't see it when I'm looking down at the vise, but I could look up in the at the camera on screen, and boy, there was this big old stump sticking up in the air there. I had to get rid of it. Anyway, so I'll grab one of my feathers here. This one looks good. Should be enough to do the job. And just like the other two fellows did, I'm going to leave a little bit of bare stem between my tie down point and the first turn there, so that well, here, let me show you what happens if you don't do that. If you tie that down tight just like that, it looks good until you start to wrap. And then those first turns, see how that kicks back there? You'll have strands of your hackle fiber sticking back at about a 45-degree angle, and you don't want that. There's no reason to, but all you have to do is have some bare stem there, take the fibers out of the equation for a short term. And I'll just trim off the waist of the stem. Kind of build up a thread base there. I call it a hackle platform, so that it tapers kind of slightly towards the hook eye. And we'll just start wrapping. I like to have 3 or 4 turns behind. And that first turn in front of the wing, I'll pull that wing back and I'll really see how I'm jamming that feather clear over, because there's a little space under that wing if you don't do that. And there we go, just about where we want. Tie off the feather. Now I'm going to pull the fibers back and wrap a thread head in a jam knot, doing what we call the dog legging the hackle. So it anchors it really well, and it also cleans the head up. And I'm going to make sure none of the fibers get tangled into my whip finish. I'll just take and use the Jan Abben trick of sliding the first half hitch back tight against those fibers. And that cleans it up right there in front, so you don't have any fibers sticking out front. Now I'll grab my whip finish tool. And there we go with that. There we go with that. Let's see how that looks. I'm going to adjust those wings just a little bit. Okay, that looks pretty good. And I think that'll do it for that fly. Questions?
Do you ever
No.
do you ever clip the bottom like some of the flies to get it to sit flatter on the surface, Al?
On that one, I don't. There's another series of flies that I tie in which I do. However, most of the time I don't, because I think your objective, Chuck, is to have a flat bottom, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, what I do is there's 2 ways that I do it, and it's the way I apply the dubbing. One is a Dan Byford method, in which I crisscross dubbing colored thread through the bottom of the hackle, which brings them up. Anyway, it brings them up so they're flat. That's one way of doing it. And there's another way of doing it. And most of the time, if I wanted to do that, then I'll tie a water walker style fly, which is a couple of parachutes, 1 parachute around each post, and it gives you a better profile on the water. It makes the wings there, the hackle sit more like that
Right.
down on the water.
Yeah,
So
I know what a water
at some
walker.
point in time, I'll tie a water walker for one of our programs. But for now, that's the one we got tonight.
But I like the idea of the dubbing under the hackle rather than cutting the hackle. That's a really good thing. I saw you
Yeah.
do that once already, and I'd forgotten about that. That's really good.
Okay, well, let me add in my good friend Eric Austin, and I think Jay has already left us.
We
So,
had a question from Amy about Fran Betters' books and which ones had a lot of poetry in them. And Something's Fishy in the Adirondacks is a book of just his poems. And then Fisher Smarter in the Adirondacks has a lot of his poetry and stories as well about his father and fishing at night with great big huge flies that were forerunners to comparadons. I have the book Fisher Smarter in the Adirondacks, and I like it a lot. And even this book here, which is really the best tying book. It's got the Haystack series, and it's got his Snowshoe Rabbit fly, the usual, in it, and other flies as well. But even it has poetry in it, and a lot of Fran's stuff is pretty humorous. So I do recommend his poetry as well.
There was a question in the chat: does the yarn float as good as dry fly dubbing. I don't know that it makes any difference. I think what floats it is the hackle and so forth. Dubbing gets wet, just like yarn gets wet. Truth of the matter is, you grease it up, and when it quits floating, I take it off, put it in my vest to dry, and put another one on. So I really don't know. Any other questions? Well, I think at this point, then we'll just go to full screen with everybody here, and we can chat for a bit before we sign off. Let me get rid of me, and we'll remove Eric's spotlight. Now it's just all of us here chatting, and
You want
hey,
me to?
Sherry, I see you muted.
Oh, sure. There's Sherry.
Yeah.
And there's Dick Shaw.
Hey, Dick. Yes, welcome.
We were talking about the Ausable, not the Ausable tonight, Dick. I'm sorry.
I didn't want to show how dumb I am, but what is a correct pronunciation Ausable or Ausable?
Oh, Ausable. It's French, you know, Ausable, which means I think where the sable are, you know, the trappers named it. And we in the North Country were fairly ignorant though, and it quickly became Ausable there. So
Eric, isn't the Ausable in New York and the Ausable is in Michigan?
right.
Yeah,
That's correct.
that's
The
what I thought.
Ausable in Michigan means river of sand, and it's two
Oh.
words. But,
Well, we had a sable farm on our sables, so I don't know.
Isn't
always-
it interesting how the women's coats and the different attitude on fur is made?
Yeah.
Well, it's changed some things in the world. We'll leave it at that.
Yeah. That's for sure. I'm sure the Ausable farm is gone, although I don't know that for a fact. I don't know it for a fact. It was near what we called Ausable Chasm, which was the ninth wonder of the world, according to somebody in the North Country. It was cool. Don't get me wrong, but ninth wonder, I don't know.
So
Well,
back to your
fish
comment
both.
about the the wicking of your the yarn versus other dubbing materials versus whatever. It begs the question, if you have the almost nothing on the shank of the hook, you just have the hackle and tail. So like a very, very thin floss or something, does that help the flotation, meaning minimize the amount of yarn that can absorb water versus just keep swapping flies or dubbing it horrendously or doping it, I should say. Is that, I know catskill flies tend to be very, very thin body and therefore they float quite well. And so even with minimum hackle, so I don't know, it's just a question.
It's a good question. I don't have the answer. I've been one of these guys that when the fly sinks, I pull it off and put something else on, or usually I'm such a great caster that I lose it in a tree long before I have to even worry about that. So
That's
why
I think flies, Chuck, need some reflectivity or something. Otherwise, I mean, the fish is looking at a hook, okay, which may not look like a body to the fish, Whereas fur has some reflectivity. Sparkle yarn certainly does. I don't know. I'm just theorizing.
So you're not a fish.
I certainly am not.
well,
Well,
it looks
thank
like
you guys.
I'm sorry, Chuck, go ahead.
I just said thank you both, all three of you, actually. Yeah. Unfortunately, we lost one, but great show. Thank you.
Well, let me get my wrap in here so that I can I'll have it for the recording when I do the editing. Well, that's it for today. Thank you so much for joining us. For now, it's a wrap until next time.